And so that started off this kind of quest. And what I also noticed in several years later, understanding that adverse childhood experiences predict who's going to end up with adult challenges, whether those are physical or emotional or relational challenges. And one of the things that the research shows is that if you had a positive childhood experience, that could sort of buffer some of the adverse childhood experiences. And those positive experiences tend to be a connection with an empathetic, compassionate adult. Usually it's an adult or it's someone a little bit older than you.
All right, Dr. 1Drea, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. So honored.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you for having me, Tracy.
Seriously, so I'm just overjoyed at the conversation that will unfold. I wanted to open up by asking you about your name change and the journey from Andrea to 1Drea.
That is the question of the year. I was born as Andrea Amelia Pennington, and I've gone by many names throughout my life. Amelia, my middle name, came from my great grandmother, and many people in the family have that name. So there were periods of my life where I actually went by Amelia because it made me feel closer to my dad's side of the family. I changed my name in high school and college. I think I've struggled with identity a lot, and your name, when someone calls your name or you tell someone your name, you are declaring a sort of energetic identity. And over the course of the years, when I started out on my spiritual awakening journey, was in the early 2000s. I was already a doctor, already kind of doing things in the media and television world. And I noticed that I was really struggling with this identity because at the time I was the medical director and spokesperson for Discovery Health Channel. So I was on TV every day, doing the news, doing documentaries. I had my own show. And then I had my wellness center. And so I was starting to be known as Dr. Andrea, and I'm doing all of that. But along the way, as I was on my own journey of recognizing my toxic childhood and the effects that it had on me, I was starting to have a spiritual awakening. And so I had these three identities at the time. The TV Andrea, the medical Andrea, and then this emerging soul that really wanted to express who I am fully. And I started to feel fragmented and frustrated because everyone wanted me to be in a little box. Like the TV people wanted me to be this way, and the American Medical Association was like this way. And when I started on my awakening journey, I had this realization that wearing all these different hats and masks and trying to fit in was causing me turmoil. And it came to me, no, there's not all these different versions of me. There's only one Drea. And DaeEss 1Drea is what I go by. I wasn't ready to do that on television because I was still very much driven by conformity. But in my musical career, in the early 2000s, I was starting to go by DaeEss 1Drea as my stage name. But over the years, having some experiences with MDMA therapy and sitting with the Great Mother, ayahuasca, and several ceremonies with psilocybin, I've had these ego death and rebirth experiences. And each time just sort of peeling back these layers of who I am not and getting in touch with who I know I really am as a spiritual being on this planet. And last year, while sitting with the Great Mother, ayahuasca, I went through yet another intense ego dissolution, ego death, and a purge. I mean, a purge to end all purges, where I was asked by the medicine, and this is now public knowledge because it's in my book, Sacred Medicine. I was asked by the medicine if I would leave it all behind. Not like suicide, but like leave my daughter with all of the pain that was swirling in me. It was like, well, you want to be away from the pain? Would you leave? And I said no on the second ceremony out of four. I couldn't imagine what that means. What does it mean to leave? Um, on the final ceremony, dealing with all this sort of angst, guilt as a mom, I'm not good enough, like all this stuff. The great mother asked me again, will you leave your daughter? And at that time, I saw this vision of me, kind of shaved head in robes. And I looked sort of off and alone, but I looked peaceful in this vision. And I said, yes, if that's what's going to bring peace to me and my family. And of course, as soon as I said yes, like grab the bucket, I went and had a purge. But as I was purging, I knew that I was purging out an old soul karmic lineage, because the way that I had existed as a physician, as a mother, was all conditioned by some of my karma, but a lot of my nurturing and neglect and toxicity at home. And so as I was, puking into the bucket, it became really clear to me that I was purging out an identity. And I think by the third time I'm heaving over, I'm like, who am I going to be after this? And I knew that a name change was going to happen. And in the integration process, it was clear to me, like, oh, I had been given or taken a new name, DaeEss 1Drea, when I was really embracing who I am as an artist. And yeah, so shortly after, I let the dust settle, as one does after a big psychedelic journey. You're not supposed to rush into making crazy decisions. I did tell my daughter, I told my fiance, who's now my husband. And then little by little, I sat with it. And the resonance and the energy really spoke spoke true to me, felt true to me. And so voila, today I am DaeEss 1Drea Pennington Wasio, because I just got married.
Congratulations again on your
Thank you.
recent nuptials. Yes. Which is it's another identity crossing too, as well, that ceremony.
Exactly.
Wow, beautiful, beautiful story. And I love it so much because I feel like it gives permission for others to really shed identities themselves that no longer serve the person, the soul, the persona. It's hard to really, the ego, well, all of it together, as
Right.
we're in, just in the self realization, self actualization process. And especially for the true artists among us as well, who are, walking this earth. um I think it's a beautiful ceremony, like a beautiful ceremony to walk through and to actually have the courage to claim it as well as its own journey. And I just love hearing it. I have had a couple of my friends move through similar journeys, and typically with ayahuasca as well. Like, she really calls you to that
Mm.
threshold. Um, and so thank you so much for sharing that. I think it also speaks to um, a little bit about, at least, so both of us coming from medical backgrounds in particular, which, medicine, especially Western allopathic medicine, is, I feel like, one of the most conformist kind of processes. And it's all,
Mm-hmm.
I joke, it's its own cult, that you very much are indoctrinated into a way of seeing and believing and behaving. And if you deviate at all from what is expected, then you will quickly be ostracized, punished. It's a very rigorous selection process that when you're a young adult, and especially when we're deep in our people pleasing kind of mode, in order
Yeah.
to, because we feel like we need to earn love in that way, we conform and we abandon these parts of ourselves. But my hope is that, especially as psychedelic medicine, this the goes a little bit more mainstream, we can have more room for different expressions within the field. And in fact, I also wholeheartedly believe that that will help us to better serve our patients when we allow for a more diverse expression of the human spirit, and allow physicians in particular to reclaim these other aspects of themselves. And I feel like that kind of weaves nicely into where I wanted to move, which is, I think a lot of us who start to explore psychedelics and plant medicines, especially when we come from a background of medicine, we start to explore it because we get to a place of manifesting the abandonment of our more authentic selves as burnout, moral injury, depression. It goes by many different names. But I was wondering if you could just expand a little bit on your philosophy, like your understanding of what moral injury and burnout really is, and how psychedelics, maybe psilocybin in particular, can be a real tool for healing.
Hmm. For me, the first time I experienced burnout was in the early 2000s when I was doing the TV thing, as I mentioned, and the wellness center, and was on my own spiritual journey. Um, I see that burnout is is not a condition of overwork. That's what most people talk about. Like, I'm working so much. It's these long hours, whether you're a physician or in the helping professions, whether that's a teacher, a firefighter, or you're caring for an elderly parent, or, a special needs child. People think that it's the overwork, it's the number of hours that you're putting out and not getting enough rest. But what I found in my own journey of recovery, and then, working with people in burnout for the last 15 years, is that there's this psychological component. And if you were, if you listen to most people, they think, if I just go on a vacation, if I could just get 2 weeks or a whole month off, I'm going to get better. Other people, when they start to recognize, okay, this is a toxic work environment, like they're putting too much on me and I don't have the ability to say no. So if I just got that other job, things would get better. And what we find is that when people go on a vacation or they get a new job, they have a little honeymoon period where they think, okay, it worked. I'm feeling better. But we know that 50% of people who burn out once will burn out again and again and again. It's a relapsing condition. And so, why is that? It's not just because there's overwork. There is something in our psyche that tells us, I can't say no. I let other people overstep boundaries. I overgive, uh, and all of that. And so, what I started to understand is that, like you said, for those of us who've been in medicine for a while, we're indoctrinated into a mindset and a conditioning that makes us tend to overgive. Now, it's not just the establishment, it's also what we are bringing to it. So, you and I talked a little bit before about this wounded healer archetype. A lot of us who are called into the helping professions, whatever that is, whether that's healthcare or it's a teacher or, public service, we are doing that in an answer to a call to one of our inner needs that wasn't met adequately as a child, or an experience, seeing a family member go through a challenging health experience, or it's our own internal angst where we think, if I become a therapist or I become a doctor, I'm going to be able to solve this for myself and then help other people. And so what does that mean? It means that we come into the profession with, some may call it a tendency towards codependency, where we want other people to get better, so it has a reflection on us. Um, we don't put self-care front and center, or we actually even think that self-care and rest is equivalent to laziness or selfishness. So there's like all this psychological stuff that most people, when I first started treating burnout, most people weren't talking about. They were just talking about the rest component, like get rest, start eating better, cut out the caffeine and the alcohol and the pills so that you can build back up your body's resources, which you absolutely need to do. And there's a whole, rehab model that really works for the psyche. So I say all of that to say I recovered from burnout, um, not through the use of psychedelics at the time, because when I hit rock bottom, I was having suicidal ideations. And for me, based on my spiritual beliefs, I had already agreed that in this lifetime, I'm not allowed to die by suicide. So at that point, I really had to throw my hands up in surrender and call on the divine. And I ended up having an out of body experience, which, you can see the TED talk or read about it in one of the books. But what it allowed me to realize is that there's more to me than what I had been programmed into being. And it, it revealed to me that there are choices that we make consciously and unconsciously, that we have the permission to actually stop making those choices. And in my case, it was either life or death. I had no in between. I was so miserable. I was so full of anxiety and depression, that I literally wanted my life to be over. So it provided a way out. It also, having a near death experience without being flatlined in an accident or under anesthesia, I had never heard of someone having an experience like that. It led me into searching, and it led me to find shamanic rituals. And I learned that there are cultures all over the world that do rites of passage. And whether it's whirling or drumming or chanting or taking psychoactive substances, there are cultures that help people get into that state to leave behind old patterns of thinking and get into right relationship with self. And so in 2007, I stepped onto the shamanic path. I was called to sit with the great mother, ayahuasca. And what I've learned since then is when you are recovering from burnout, it requires that you unlearn a whole lot of thoughts, behaviors, emotional reactions, and programming. And that's hard. If you have great therapists, if you really get plugged into a support system, it is possible. And for many people, a long recovery is not feasible. They need to get back into life. And that's when I started to realize that when we invite people to sit with, in my case, it's psilocybin or it's ketamine, because they're legal where I facilitate, it helps people break down those defenses, go deep within, resolve the trauma or whatever the wounding was, and start to see life with a new perspective. And that gives them the freedom to then recreate their life, like to pull their life back together. But now with this framework, that we call the cornerstone process, and with this sense of vision of where they want their life to go, that's not based on society or programming or parents. And for me, I think that's the fastest way that we can rehabilitate people and then eventually rehabilitate. That's a bigger, loftier goal, but you can't fix healthcare burnout, for example, just by giving people, more vacation time. Like, you've got to change the system, and the only way we can do that is in mass, people getting the awakening. And awakening is what my life's work is now all about: awakening an identity. And I find that adding in psychedelics and breath work that can get you into an expanded state of consciousness is the best path for the kinds of people that I work with.
Hmm. I can't, I mean, it's such a noble pursuit, especially given what I feel like are now just daily signs of despair in the healthcare field, and like you said, in other caregiving professions. And then of course the pandemic exacerbated a lot of this, or at least was maybe the first stage of awakening for a lot of people. A lot of
Oh
people
yeah.
hitting rock bottom during those years, and we're still, barely coming out of that. And um and it let's see, there's a few things that sort of came up when you were sharing that. One was, I can imagine that for a lot of professionals who hear about, who are really coming to the end of their rope now, that, they're having, perhaps even having something like suicidal ideation, or if it's not ending your own life, sometimes it's ending a partnership where, you have young children, or some other, you feel like you have to almost kill something major in your life in order to break free of the pain that you're experiencing. Um, and and also, this also goes back to, I think, just having the courage to step out and claim the new identity, being open about this kind of work, because there are far too many people now who are suffering, that we, at least for people who've experienced the transformational healing power of plant medicines, it's like I get to a point where I could no longer stay quiet about it because of how transformational it was for me. And I see so many other people suffering and think, oh my goodness, there is an alternative for you, to where you don't have to destroy your own life. Um, and and yet I can hear and feel and have experienced myself the skepticism, or the hesitancy, or the judgment, again going back to conditioning and how we're indoctrinated and programmed in the Western, especially in Western allopathic medicine, to be so deeply skeptical of other ways of practicing medicine, or under other ways of understanding what healing really is. What would you say to that, maybe that physician or that other professional who's experiencing burnout, who or more, experiencing that really deep, almost that existential pain, to sort of maybe just crack open a little bit more the opening to the possibility of working with psychedelics and plant medicines, where they would maybe previously be closed off?
Well, I think if we're talking about physicians, most of us still have some sort of a scientific leaning. And I would say, look at the research. Like, yeah, it sounds incredibly woo woo when you hear that someone has a death and rebirth experience and they're purging out an identity. Like, that sounds crazy. And I would say, check out the research. In the words of Jay-Z, men lie, women lie, numbers don't. Like, really start looking at what's happening. And we're really just at the tip of the iceberg with research, even though we have 30, 40 years of good data on treatment resistant depression, and even substance use disorder now, eating disorders, end of life anxiety. There's data out there. And I would say, start to look at it. Like, look at what's happening and what has been happening for decades in some of these clinical trials. Yes, the numbers are small, but we've even got EEG data, we've got brain scans, we've got, pre and post follow-up. So you can start to just explore. And if you're still not convinced, well, nothing I can do for you. But I think what I have seen with many people is when they do a little bit of the research, which inevitably leads them to watch a video or two or documentary, where you get to hear real life people, not just the fanatics that have a great experience, but you're hearing other people. Uh, it starts to demystify and destigmatize what psychedelics and sacred medicines can do for us. Uh, Thankfully, people like you and me have come out of hiding and shared. Um, I think for me, one of the other touch points is about suicidality. In the United States, suicide is a leading cause of death for physicians. And shortly before the pandemic and during the pandemic, I lost two friends who died by suicide. One was a naturopathic doctor, and one was an emergency medical doctor. And these two people were very dear friends of mine. And at that time, I hadn't totally opened up about my healing journey with sacred medicines and shamanic rituals. And I was devastated, absolutely devastated. And I realized if if I had shared maybe a little, even just the scientific stuff, like we know that ketamine, super duper safe. You did peds. I don't know if you knew this, but I did peds. The first time I experienced ketamine was in an OR with a kid. So I've known this to be a very safe and well-researched medication. And now we can see that many people can go to even just an emergency department. You don't have to go to an infusion center. If you were suicidal, you could get a ketamine injection. And that might open a window for you where the suicidality drops and gives you an opportunity to work with a therapist, a coach, a doctor, a psychiatrist, or something. And so for me, it became imperative that I open up and share because most people don't know about this. Most people in healthcare would do like you and I have talked before. You go to a shrink or maybe you see a therapist or you get put on antidepressants. And I'm sorry, they're not the answer 100% of the time. There is a percentage of people that it works and it helps and it stabilizes and buys them some time, but it's not 100%. Now, of course, psychedelics aren't either, but when you look at the side effect profile and the long-term effects, like you can't be, well, it's not ideal to be on SSRIs for life. If we could actually have a treatment that helps people get off of medications or actually get free from PTSD, get free from the trauma that leads them into codependent ways of being and overwork and burnout, wouldn't you want people to know about that? So I think what we are doing with your podcast, my podcast, with the books that I write and all these summits is to let people know that there's another side to this. It's not just the crazy folks, doing tripping and whatnot. So that's a long answer to your question, but that's what I got.
No, that all of that resonates so much. And it is so exciting to be alive at a time when major institutions, prestigious institutions, are doing incredible research to legitimize these medicines that were for so long stigmatized. And it's funny when I talk to my colleagues or family members or, anyone, even sort of my younger family members, there's still so much in the sort of cultural zeitgeist that is, I think, creates misconceptions about what psychedelics and sacred medicines really are. I mean, all the time I'm saying it's all about your relationship to the medicine, the setting, the intention, the integration work afterwards that completely, and we don't have a model for that in Western medicine. In Western medicine, you just mindlessly, pop a pill or, get carried into the OR. And it doesn't matter what your preparation was. It doesn't matter what your integration really is. And it's just it's a paradigm shift. Really acknowledging the power of the soul and how it interfaces with your mind and spirit, all of it, how that is how that's actually at the root of so much disease, and especially in the modern world, and what the vast majority of the disease burden that we see presenting to the healthcare system now is. And rather than just simply addressing physical symptoms from a biochemical or biomedical lens, it's looking at getting to the root, which a lot of times are these early childhood experiences that set into motion particular patterns in our physiology or neurophysiology that then manifest as physical behavior and then a physical manifestation of our being. And and so the deconditioning, the unlearning process, yes, is so that's such a big part of the healing journey. um and I think you sort of touched on it earlier too, and it weaves into, you released a book not too long ago, the top 10 traits of, highly resilient people. And one of I mean all of them, just all of the traits, from insight and emotional intelligence I wrote them down here just to refer to them: flexibility, adaptability, tolerance, compassion. It's like, wow, all of those things, all of those traits, um, I experienced in a very visceral, bodily, subcognitive, like not intellectual, but like a deep remembering in my body in a
Mm.
ceremony. That, because I could intellectually understand all of these things, but then to experience it in that altered state of consciousness as a deep remembering of our true authentic nature, open the door for me to then take that altered state and then turn it into an altered trait, this new trait of resiliency that then I could bring to, because I started um, working with sacred medicines during my residency. And so, um, it was, especially for anybody who's going through, I think, trying time with healing, um, burnout or moral injury, you constantly being triggered by the same thing. Your environment doesn't
Oh yeah.
change, whether it's a
Oh yeah.
difficult family environment, difficult work environment, what have you. And so I feel like I really trained almost in the gauntlet or crucible of, like really testing the power of these medicines and the importance of integration while in residency training. And you touched on too, I think one of the traits that you highlight in the book is this idea of connection to positive people, and that which weaves into this idea of group work and community, and just how vital those aspects are, which I feel like actually the research hasn't yet really touched on. But anybody who's sat in an ayahuasca circle, if you go to any of these, if you go to the more indigenous culture side of wisdom, the wisdom that's there in the rites of passage and the ritual and the ceremony that's been preserved in those cultures, that is a key aspect. And I was wondering if you could just elaborate more on how that played a role in your journey, and how it still plays a role in your work.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, all of the top 10 traits that I wrote about in the book, I studied in my clients, my patients at the time, and in myself. Um, One of the things that I don't know if you knew this, I'm sure you probably did, but in the beginning of my career, when I shifted from peds and opened up this integrative wellness center, I ran an intensive outpatient program for binge eating disorder. And pretty soon thereafter, many local therapists were sending folks to come be in this integrative environment for substance use disorder as well. And what I discovered is there would be, sort of these pockets of people. Most of them had trauma in their background. They had some adverse childhood experience or trauma that they found their comfort or relief through food or through substances or withholding food. Uh, what I discovered is some of the people would get better just by being in this protected bubble where they could get their needs met. They got the proper nutrition. They got acupuncture to start regulating the nervous system. They got support. They got all of these things. But then there were other people who just would continue. They'd kind of circle the drain. They'd switch addictions or they'd sabotage. So I started asking this question: what is it that really underpins resilience? Like, why is it that some people can be in the same situation now maybe they even had the same situation in their past, but some people can take off and some people don't. And underlying all of it for the research that I did was self-love, a belief that you are worthy of being in this life, that you are worthy of happiness and success and vitality. And so that started off this kind of quest. And what I also noticed in several years later, understanding that adverse childhood experiences predict who's going to end up with adult challenges, whether those are physical or emotional or relational challenges. And one of the things that the research shows is that if you had a positive childhood experience, that could sort of buffer some of the adverse childhood experiences. And those positive experiences tend to be a connection with an empathetic, compassionate adult. Usually it's an adult or it's someone a little bit older than you. So it could be an older sibling, an auntie, a grandparent, a coach, or a therapist, or a community member that's able to kind of scoop you up with whatever drama or trauma you've experienced to buffer that by letting you know it's not your fault. It's horrible what happened, and that's not okay, but you are okay. We're going to get through this together. And and so this connection to positive people, which is one of the traits of resilience, was surprising for me because I used to be one of those people that just like I kind of go into hiding when I have a problem so that I can go figure it out myself. And again, that's partly how I grew up, and there's all that nature nurture influence. But when I started to look at the research that says you will have a greater likelihood of resilience, and resilience is being able to return to baseline if you have positive relationships. And and then I had to really look at that like, okay, I can't be you can go into silence for a while, if you're in that initial kind of hunker down. But if you stay in withdrawal from people, if you're in isolation, you have a greater likelihood of not emerging resilient and instead sort of circling the drain of PTSD. Now, of course, there are 10 traits. You don't only have to focus on positive relationships. But the other thing that I noticed, again, from my patients was leading the group work. So we did acupuncture for 45 minutes before they came into their group sessions where we did behavior mod, nutrition, education, and sharing. There was a sense of camaraderie. These are people, many of them would have never gone to rehab, right? Well, I should say, after we did binge eating disorder and got success, we got other people coming to the center just to lose weight. Maybe they didn't have binge eating disorder, but they wanted to lose weight in a more holistic, healthy way. And so these were people who were now sitting in group where they would have never talked about their problems out loud or their childhood or put any of this into context. And what I discovered is that, wow, there's this additional healing element that comes from that group energy. Yes, you can see that in 12-step programs and other group supports. And what was just beautiful was knowing that we could facilitate that in a safe way. We give people the opportunity to not share at all. You can just come and just listen. You don't have to share. But what I found is we do recover in community. We recover together. And so when I, again, like you pointed out, when I started going down the shamanic path, people were not going to the local shaman, their curandera, their ayahuasquero, or medicine man or woman to just fix me. It was always in the context of the community and the land and this bigger picture. And that really resonates with me. I've just been polishing up a research paper, like doing a comprehensive review on the power of community and how psychedelic therapy, as it moves forward, I think the community or the group therapy aspect is going to be crucial. Number one, because obviously the two facilitator, one person clinical model is not sustainable for most people. For the millions of people who would benefit from psychedelic assisted therapy, there aren't enough therapists trained in the modality, and nobody has the kind of money that it would really require. And so we're going to have to look at group therapy as an option. And so I feel like we can tap into that power that the indigenous have known for thousands of years. And, since AA and other support groups over the last 5 decades, we can see that these are possibilities for us, right?
Yes, absolutely. The scaling, issue for sure. I think, it goes, what a beautiful answer to that. It's like, oh, going back to community and group healing. Um and and also I think it's interesting to bring in especially your media background in all of this because um I went through when I was in my actually when I was in medical school. I started to make content for Khan Academy for just
Oh,
educational content, videos on mostly biochemistry topics, and it was for the mission of at the time was to create free MCAT study materials. And so I got really into creating this content with the software program. And then I started a YouTube channel at the time. And just they allowed me to sort of double publish on the Khan Academy website, but also on my own YouTube channel. And I still get, it's amazing, videos that I uploaded 8 years ago. I still get comments from people saying, thank you so much from all around the
oh,
world.
yeah.
And it's really incredible. I think, especially in this same sort of time period, we've just seen the absolute explosion of social media as becoming the main form of media consumption, and all of the very interesting effects that has created in the collective as well. And you have, your extensive background in media. And I really grappled with this idea of, I was in Los Angeles as well. And so there's Hollywood, and the media industry is just such a potent and powerful presence there. And this concept of media as medicine really bubbled up for me in my journey work, and I connected
Mhm.
with some others there, people who had been in Hollywood and had also stumbled upon the shamanic path, and then also had sort of moved more into medicine work and personal development and all of this sort of thing. And this idea that it's not just what you consume, what you put into your body with your food,
Mm.
but so much of our health is influenced by what we consume with our mind too, and especially through the form of media. And what if there is this possibility that media, I think social media has such a negative connotation for people about all of the detrimental effects of it, but to me, I really view it as like any technology. It's a neutral tool that can be wielded for for good means or for nefarious ones. And um and a lot of what I learned in my consciousness exploration was facilitated through people who were sharing via social media. And also how social media can help facilitate these online communities where you might be, let's say, you're living in a part of the country where no one around you, this is not part of your cultural milieu whatsoever, but you're curious about it. There's a way to connect with other people through the internet and through social media and cultivate these communities online. And I know you actually host a psychedelic Saturdays group for free. I mean, what an offering for people. But can you, I was just curious what your take sort of is on leveraging media within the sacred medicine space, because in a lot of ways it feels like a clash of modernity with these ancient, with these ancient cultures. And how do you sort of see that moving forward?
Mm. Well, I think what sacred medicines have done for me and what they hold the promise of is returning us into right relationship with ourselves, like finding our authentic self, also coming into right relationship with this great Mother Earth. A lot of people have this eco awakening after sitting with sacred medicine. And and that's beautiful. And we're not going to go backwards in time in terms of technology. And I feel like we need millions more people to become awakened to all of the various plights that we're dealing with on this planet. And media is an effective tool. We're in a global citizen world, and getting information via the media has saved many people's lives, because previously, you only had your immediate circle, you know, and now maybe there isn't anyone in your town who's like you or who's open to things, but now there are billions, okay, maybe millions of people that you could connect with. And I can say that, especially on the self-love journey, when someone is learning to love themselves, if you've come out of burnout, or you've come out of a toxic relationship, or even a toxic family, it can feel very isolating and very much alone, because you're trying to step into this authentic expression of who you're learning yourself to really be. And you might go into a space where they don't want you to be evolved. They want you to be the same person that they could dump on before. And for a lot of my patients, they felt completely trapped. Well, who do I have? I don't, you know, beyond my 12-step group, who else is there? And so when we started the real self-love movement back in, I think it was 2007 or 2008, we were doing local events in the Washington, D.C. area for people to come and feel what it feels like to be lifted up, to be supported, to be seen and heard. And this was out of the 12 step or recovery. It was just like, whatever you're recovering from, let's do it together. And then in 2017, we moved the real self love movement online, and hosting on the second Tuesday of every month consistently. I think I've only missed 3 in the last 6 years. Has been incredible, because people are finding community outside of their geographic location. And when I started earlier in this year, 2023, um, Sacred Psychedelic Saturdays, it was the same concept. Like, maybe you have been on a retreat, or you're looking to explore one of these sacred allies, but the people around you might think you're cuckoo, or they might be afraid. Um, you need to connect with people that you can start to ask questions and bond with, or at least share with. And so that was kind of the vision behind creating yet another safe space. We meet on the first Saturday of every month. And again, as you mentioned, completely free. And we're starting to add in other resources on preparation and integration for sacred journeys. And it's already helping people to destigmatize, to normalize what they're experiencing. And I think that's one of the reasons why I am continuing to do books and continuing to speak out online, because whether it's print or it's digital media or cyberspace, we need more safe spaces, and we need more education. We've been talking about how transformational psychedelics have been in our lives personally, but there are a lot of people who are harmed in ceremonies, flying all over the place with rent a shaman, as I call them. And we need to be sharing even the dark side of psychedelics, so that people are informed and they know what to look for and what to avoid. Because for many of us, we're just learning how to trust our intuition after years of not trusting, after putting our hopes and dreams in other people or doctors or therapy or medication. So it's a very long-winded answer to your question about the media, but I'm grateful that I had the experience that I did with performing arts and then with the media. I'm working on a documentary right now that covers resilience and in all the different ways that we can tap into it. And one of those ways is also through sacred medicine. And I hope that this starts to give people another view on how you can recover from, whether it's burnout or suicidality, depression, anxiety, or just not knowing where you fit in the world. So stay tuned for that.
Yes, I'm so excited to see that work. Yeah, I think about it too a lot with just the younger generation, especially young women. I hear all these statistics about particularly teenage girls and the negative effects that social media can have. I mean, you have a daughter. Can I ask how old your daughter is?
Yeah, she just turned 17 a few
Yeah,
months
yeah,
ago.
you're raising a teenage girl in today's world, um, and it's just fascinating to see my own relationship with social media shift as I went down this path, and and just changing who I follow, who I put my attention towards, and because where attention goes, energy flows, all of those things. And then also too staying keeping eyes wide open with the harm reduction aspects of that are so necessary for I think get out there. And I definitely feel like I could do a better job of that too. And I think also just reinforces the idea how important it is to have relationships and community, healthy relationships and community when entering into this path. Because a lot of when I read these cautionary tales, I think there's one shared by Jordan Peterson recently, sort of just blanket, just saying, be careful with psychedelics. And it's like, yes, of course. And inevitably, when I read the story of what happened, there is some element missing around your mindset going into whether or not it was even a ceremonial container, whether or not there's any sort of support in the integration phase afterwards. Inevitably some piece of that is missing. And so therefore how it's not just a nice to have. If you really being in a community, whether it's fellow friends who are on this path, it doesn't necessarily, for me, a lot of it wasn't engaging with a professional, although I'm really glad to be entering this work as a facilitator to hold that space for people. But it is so important because these medicines are so destabilizing. And you're incredibly vulnerable psychologically afterwards. So it is so important to have that community to hold you and to sort of um, keep you on the path and not deviate from. It's quite easy to start deviating into other realms. um I did want to ask too, well, how, we talked about your daughter briefly, just how I think a lot about how sacred medicines have played a role in my own sort of rites of passage through Carl Jung's feminine archetypes of, from maiden to mother, and then eventually mother to crone, and how vital they have been for supporting me in that process, and just my identity around being a mother, and helping to, for me, I feel like, ease that what can be a very very difficult transition for so many women. And especially when we look at things like postpartum depression or postpartum anxiety, or hear a lot about postpartum rage too.
Yeah.
um, and yeah, I just wanted to ask you how these medicines have informed sort of that relationship for you and your identity as a mother, and how you think they can play a role in reclaiming these rites of passage in our modern day societies.
Mm. Gosh, that's a full one. Yeah. Where to begin? Um, well, you know that I have recently been sharing a lot about microdosing for women. Um, gosh, there's so much to say there. I mean, women have been so programmed and conditioned into various roles of submission and what have you, that we're all in need of liberation, as we're going through these different stages of living as a woman on this planet. I think in my own journey, I was grateful for the experiences that I had with MDMA. Um, it was just before I became a mother that I got to experience MDMA in a setting that allowed me to feel the heart opening, deep, unconditional love that I never felt as a child. So that when I had my daughter and I had this unconditional love pouring out toward her, but also had all these doubts about, am I good enough? And I just felt like I wasn't ever getting it right. And all of these things, it led me onto the mindfulness path and starting to work with meditation, because you can't be doing MDMA all the damn time. And, so learning meditation, and especially the metta or loving kindness meditation, helped me tune into compassion and start transforming. Then challenges came up in the postpartum period, mainly, of course, the hormonal perturbations, but also shifting from being this workaholic type A, on, to I'm just a mom now. And I say just because that's what my mindset was. It was like, I didn't even have a name anymore. I was Sienna's mom. It's like, oh, there's Sienna's mom. I'm like, oh, I don't have a name anymore. Like, all I am is this milk producing machine. I change diapers and I eat and then I feed the baby. It was like, and that was a struggle for me in those early days. And it took a lot of mindfulness training to get through there. And it was shortly after she was born that I stepped onto the shamanic path and had my first calling to ayahuasca. And being with the first shaman, where he was showing us sort of all these rites of passage, and I started to understand myself first as a human and then as a woman, and realizing all the programming and conditioning that I had taken on. um, it was liberating, because I realized all of these things that I was striving to be were not inherent in my life path. They had been programmed into me from society, from my family, from the media. And hearing about what other indigenous cultures around the world do was liberating for me. And then getting to the point of, fast forwarding another 15 years, getting to the point of being perimenopausal and in the middle of COVID, I had the experience of getting some psilocybin truffles from Amsterdam, where they're completely legal, and decided to start microdosing, mainly because I'd heard so many people talking about the creativity and the focus. And I'm running a company from the south of France and traveling and doing stuff, but the travel part went away with the pandemic. So I had time on my hands, and I had just been trained in neurofeedback. So I'm like, ooh, I want to like follow my brainwave patterns while I add in microdosing into my regimen, right? And I started seeing benefits right away. Again, that kind of creativity and focus, check, check, got that. But the interesting thing I noticed was this sense of equanimity, which, as a Buddhist practitioner, that's been like an ideal of mine for years. Like, ooh, could I ever reach equanimity? Well, I started to get hints of that with the microdosing. I got a really big dose of that when I had a ketamine journey, um, during my psychedelic assisted therapy training. So it opened my eyes to, wow, there's so many of these top 10 traits of highly resilient people that I'm tapping into much more easily. Like, mind you, I had done a good 20 years of mindfulness meditation practice, but I was getting even more finesse and benefits. So, long story short, I've now been doing some research on what are the intricacies and the differences amongst women where psychedelic assisted therapy or even microdosing could benefit us. These are things that I will be doing some research, or at least some citizen science research on, and future publications. But I think there's a great world opening up to us, and I'm really excited to be a part of it. So sorry, that's again a long answer. And now I'm realizing I only have 2 minutes before my
No,
next
yeah,
call.
no apologies needed. That was right. I think actually the timing has been perfect because I think I just touched on, I did want to touch on the women's health piece and how microdosing has played a role in your own journey with that. Um, and, uh, and I too have been exploring microdosing, especially too with helping to support people who are tapering off of antidepressants in anticipation
Hmm.
of a macrodose journey. And I used to be a little bit closed off with like I was thinking that, oh, microdosing I feel like it would be mostly useful if you've already done big ceremonies, that once you've tapped into that altered state, then you're more sensitized to a microdose. But it looks like they're, looking into the microdosing research, there's at least some hints of microdosing being especially helpful for people who are moving through depression, anxiety, and I think can be helpful. I'm really fascinated by that particular use case with supporting people,
Mm.
because the tapering off of antidepressants is no joke, and there's very little
Hmm.
support for it, and even acknowledgement of the withdrawal effects. And so I too am diving into that. But I did, yes, just want to thank you so much for your time and your sharing your wisdom, and very much looking forward to your future work. And we'll definitely be sharing links to the two recent books, and then also to your retreat coming up, and whatever else you'd like me to share. But thank you so much again.
Oh, thank you, Tracy. I so appreciate it. And, for those listening, just know that there's hope. For any other healers who might want to explore this path, we are also doing apprenticeship and giving people experiential retreats. So if you've been through a training program, but you actually want to get some experience in it, then you can come and join us in the Netherlands. So we'd love to have connection. That's what we need in this space.
Absolutely. All right, blessings.
Thank you so much. Many blessings to you.
Hello, beautiful people. If you enjoyed the podcast, please do hit that subscribe button. And as always, leaving a like or a comment, sharing or leaving a review. All of that is so appreciated as we help to grow the podcast. And if you are interested in learning more about my work as a psilocybin facilitator and integrative wellness physician, please do visit my website at www.eleusiahealth.com. That's Eleusia, ELEUSIA, health.com.